And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. And last time we had a super exciting episode building on a little bit about the connections between the brainwave patterns and meditation, as well as what some of the things that meditation opens up for us in terms of understanding and broadening awareness and kind of the conscious dials that we can tune into. And I think we might tackle a question on this episode. Serge, what do you think?
It would be interesting to look at the question one of the viewers left and see what comes out.
All right. Well, I'm up for it, and we'll maybe bring Kris in, and I'll let him know what we're talking about.
Now, we trust that you are still comfortable, and we thank you for your ongoing consideration. And before we continue, we would like to briefly point out that when we refer to shards of the self or the sharded self, again, the point is not to say that it is broken like a mirror. It is very much an assembly of psychological traits and characteristics stitched together, much like an old-fashioned quilt. Bringing together various traits and characteristics in this way broadens that self's horizons and gives it access to more than what your conscious mind would. And in this way, it creates a veritable pool of resources from which to draw from. So it is not that the self is broken, but the self is far more than any particular limited conceptions of it that you might have. And it, again, does not suffer. It is not that your soul suffers. There are many such comments online and everywhere else. The soul does not suffer. The conscious mind does because of its misinterpretations. It is simply that very often the way an individual responds to a situation causes the states either of angst or peace. And that again belongs to the various traits and characteristics that you can pull from. Now, we believe you have an inquiry from a viewer. You are muted.
Thanks, Kris. Yeah, I was just saying, well, thanks, first of all, everybody who's asking questions, and I know that having some open dialogues really important. So I'm excited for this one. But this question is, my inner conflict concerns the rules and injustices imposed upon us by the government. But I'm also very aware that life without rules and agreements is not peaceful. This is made obvious to me working with children. Children without any kinds of regulations are disruptive. My inner conflict brings up feelings of anger that I'm still trying to integrate. And they were interested in getting your view on that, Kris.
Indeed. Such an issue, or even sets of issues, because there are different things here, are not strictly black and white situations. It is a little complex. Suffice it to say that it is not necessarily society and governments that impose rules, but that those particular governments and societies are reflections, or they reflect the particular states of mind or mindsets, if you will, of its citizens. So if a whole nation in itself believes that inherently the self is suspect, Then you will have laws that try to curb the self's own suspect impulses. So even though one can look at it in the way of a society or laws or governments imposing restrictions on its citizens, those laws are reflections of beliefs held by that particular collective. Children are rambunctious by nature because they have energy, and that energy stems from their curiosity to explore the world around them in any way possible. And at the same time, yes, certain guidelines do assist children in very particular ways to, shall we simply say, help govern their particular growth in specific areas of life. But it does not mean that those governances have to be strictly enforced. There are other ways to encourage children to develop their own curiosity, their intellect, as well as emotional maturity. Again, however, it must be said that anything in the external environment is a reflection of situations that are occurring in the internal environment. So if, for instance, you were to consider that your own impulses are actually suspect, you might suspect that something in you could even be dangerous. Then you might find yourself in a situation that reflects that particular train of thoughts and all the feelings and emotions associated with it, and find yourself in an environment where you could feel that your life could even be threatened. Your very existence could be threatened in one form or another. Not unlike your idea some time ago that you might have felt that there was danger in your life. So it is important to recognize that the rules and governances established upon a population are partly the reflection of that very population's particular feelings about itself as a whole. And at the very same time, there might be how do we say, a background methodology to the madness, so to speak, where the population also makes an allowance for those kinds of governances so that they may understand what boundaries within themselves they can push or break, so that they can discover exactly what they are made of. What are their inner strengths and resources? So it is not just one side of the coin here. This is a multifaceted coin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm following you.
You're pondering.
Yeah, I'm just kind of taking it in, Kris. That's I found it a particularly interesting, just an interesting question. Well, there's one word for me that was coming to mind too, particularly with the children, was just the word like providing structure without dictating or without, like having strict rules. It seems like some sort of structure is important, or to create a scaffold for their growth of their ideas or things like that, without being too overbearing. Like the idea of balance seems.
Indeed, that is certainly understandable. And at the same time, there is an internal psychological structure that the child, all children, establish for themselves. They want to find out what kind of skills is available to them, what kind of talents they can develop. And for instance, you see children, they will play specific games. And you think, oh, it's so nice to see children play like that. But those children are not just playing a game. They're actually testing out certain psychological boundaries and what they can push against and what they can accept. So they discover their own inner world by pitting that inner world into the outer world. And thus they discover varying degrees of their creativity, their ability to collaborate, their ability to love. It is not a simple, again, black and white situation. There are many, many shades involved here. And all of it is in the control of the individual, the child, the adult, and so on. You are all manufacturing your realities according to the set rules that you decide to accept or not. Whatever behaviors and coping mechanisms that you create are the results of the various things that you believe through your attitudes and expectations. When you want to bake a cake, do you just grab some flour, some water, some salt, some sugar, some yeast, some flavoring, some coloring, and throw it around in the oven? Of course not. You have a particular method. Whether you learned it from your mother or your grandmother or cooking school or a chef or a friend, but you follow a certain kind of methodology, knowing that this will bring about this result. And as you are practiced, as you learn to bake more, then you can begin to be a little more fluid. You can begin to experiment. Perhaps you will add this ingredient or that ingredient and get some other kind of result. Whether it is baking a cake or cooking, the point is the very same. You learn something and then you begin to experiment with what you learned. And you all do that very, very thing. You may think, oh, I am being forced by Betty Crocker to follow her directions on that box of cake. Or, oh, Betty Crocker has outlined a great way to make this box cake into a delightful and edible dessert. The choice is yours. And once you are practiced at making the box cake so nicely, again, you can experiment with it. So again, always your choice. And that is what is important. When you feel that somehow or other you have no choice, then look at your own particular reasons for having painted yourself in that kind of a corner. And your behaviors and your feelings will reveal what kind of beliefs are at work. So, for instance, many people explore their dreams. It is a lovely pastime and extremely educational in terms of self It can give you tremendous clues as to your motivations, whether they are conscious or unconscious. And it is well worth the study. Of course, we do not necessarily recommend books like 1001 Dreams Interpreted for You, because your dreams are not like 1001 other individuals, even though there might be some correlating imagery. What is important, not only in looking at the scenario of the dream, but more so than anything else, pay attention to the particular feeling tones that arise from the actions and the imageries in the dream. And many people simply ignore that. They would rather cast their dreams in terms of, oh, well, this is only a reincarnational dream. But it can teach you so much more. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, we've had that conversation before, with an example of that was, um, there was a dream where there was something, called patients, like there were patients like in a hospital, um or with like the doctor patient relationship. And what the metaphor or the meaning for me was actually to have like patience, to be patient and
Indeed.
allow things to
And
develop.
that is
And
one of the incredible qualities of dreams, is that they will speak to you in metaphors that you can, if you pay attention, pick up on.
yeah, if you would have
But
tried
you
to if
have to pay attention.
yeah, if you would have tried to use that book for that, you would have totally missed it. uh
Indeed.
that stuff just isn't in there.
Indeed. Now, are there any other questions or inquiries?
Well, the other thing I thought was interesting in talking about the idea of governments or even parenting, um, I've often thought as a parent of trying to be like, I know there's the description of all that is, or of the atmospheric presence in the William James after Death Journal of American Philosopher by Jane Roberts, where she describes this atmospheric presence as this kind of matrix, or this almost unbelievable nourishing, that she just or he describes as sort of jumping to us at every moment, trying to help us
Indeed.
to fulfill ourselves. But I almost looked at like I've tried to approach like parenting from that standpoint of like, my job as the parent is to kind of as best I can be like that atmospheric presence of not to dictate what they want to do, but to kind of be in this um, supportive role to kind of help create those opportunities. And I'm also then was wondering if there's a connection there, if like really the optimal functioning of government would be kind of like in the same role to create this like presence,
Optimally,
like.
that is also the inherent aim of democracy.
Oh, interesting.
By democracy, we do not mean a theocracy, we do not mean an oligarchy or a capitalistic endeavor, but true democracy where the self is central to one's growth. For instance, if you see a child running around with a 12-inch carving knife, what do you do?
Well,
You do not have to answer, but the point is, you can let the child run around and poke itself out, or you can ask the child if they would rather have this little treat instead of wrestling the knife away, giving them a different choice. Now, some would say, for instance, well, if you leave the child alone, it will realize that the knife is not harmful. Yes, that is also true. But you don't live in a society where most children have that ability yet. So you would naturally want the child to give you the knife so it does not harm itself or anyone else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So overall, trusting those impulses is also paramount to trusting self, because impulses come from the creative and intuitive portion of the self. So if you did live in a society where this is paramount, then perhaps you would not have those kinds of knives in one form or another. And by knives, it is not necessarily something to carve the turkey with, but sometimes knives can be words or actions. Now, we will leave you to ponder the mysteries of the self and return Joseph to you.
Well, thanks, Kris. Ponder we will.
Indeed.
We'll catch you next time.